If anyone would mention the name Binchester Vinovia, you would be mistaken for thinking that it's just a everyday common or garden Roman site. But the Binchester site plan that you can see in front of you from 2018 is a site plan in short of the excavations of a barrack block. And in the bottom right hand corner, the excavations involving a medieval structure. With that little bit of a snapshot, you can see that it's multi-level, multi-historical as an archaeological site. So let's learn a little bit more about Binchester. When I presented these slides to Archaeology Cymru in the second week of June, it was presented to 4 classes, and the first thing that hits you is the scale of archaeology surviving at Binchester. The 2 individuals standing in a corridor associated with a bath suite at Binchester, and the walls, as you can see, preserved over 2 meters in height, with slab floors, an entrance way into corridor complex behind them, and door furniture as well. Binchester can be found immediately southeast of Hadrian's Wall, and it's on a major route, the Deer Street route, that heads up all the way from the south, all the way through Eberarkham, York, and then heads through Hadrian's Wall, and then the Antonine Wall, and then the Gascoigne, and the furthest most extent of the Roman world into Scotland. Notably, that's been said about Binchester is that it's the Pompeii of the north. It's the preservation of the remains are extraordinary. From the foundation trenches of the site all the way through to the topsoil, you talk about 4 meters that archaeologists have been going down. Another map of the area and the road network and the association of Binchester with other forts and other military installations in Roman Britain. So the plan that we are now seeing is just a bit of an outline with the fort and the vicus around the outside, an extensive area that the site actually occupies. So we're talking about a 12-hectare site. So that anyone knows anything about hectares, 2.5 acres in a hectare. An acre is roughly about the size of a football pitch. Work out the maths. It's an extremely large landscape with the fort itself, the civilian vicus, roads, mausolea, and all the rest of it. So when we briefly look at background history of the site itself, Binchester probably founded before about 70 years AD, and it's in extent one of the largest Roman military establishments of 7 hectares, and then the vicus itself extends it to about 12 hectares in area. So a legionary auxiliary infantry units, an ALA auxiliary cavalry unit. You've got legionary units from Spain, Hispania, and you've got Frisian auxiliary units themselves from the lowlands, Netherlands, and all the rest of it. So this site itself would have hit grace when the likes of Septimus Severus would have been heading through Binchester, maybe using the bath suite that we're going to look at in Binchester, heading all the way up through to Hadrian's Wall, military installation all the way to the very end of Roman military occupation in Britain, and if not civilian occupation in Britain as well, into the late 400s. So you can get an idea of the remains there, the dark areas, the really compacted, rich material that you'd find at such a site. Archaeological evidence that's come about due to extensive flooding of the River Wear over the site, and trapping all the archaeology and walls up to such extent that we got 2 meters in height. Excavated by Dr. David Mason. I haven't come across him in years, but I'm so pleased he's working at such a wonderful site for Durham University at Binchester. And the excavations have been taking place there from the early 1815 when it's first discovered, because of a cart went through a rut into the site and actually hit through the some of the floor levels into the hypercore system, and then the excavations have been on tow from 2009 all the way through to 2019. So we're talking about 10 years of very rich archaeological excavation at Binchester itself, and it hits alongside Vindolanda as one of the best preserved Roman archaeology sites in Britain. So you can get an idea of the plan. In the centre there you can see Fort Bath Complex marked, and centre right of the plan, Fort Defence, is where they've been excavating in more sort of recent seasons, with Deer Street going through as well, where you've got Mausolea, the Vicus complex as well. There's a lot going on there, and you can see the sort of modern buildings which are built in the 1800s as well. The excavation site, the Fort Bath complex itself, is actually covered over now, as you can see. So with a tiny bit of deterioration of the archaeology excavations, a public outcry that we've got to preserve this site, and that's exactly what was done. So we've got a really, really well preserved site that isn't under mud anymore or being destroyed. You can actually visit it. It's becoming a major sort of pilgrimage route of those really much interested and intrigued by such a wonderful site that's been preserved. We knew there was a very well preserved hypocaust system at the site in the 1800s, as I've already said, but to actually have walls like this all up to sort of ground floor level anyway is absolutely amazing. The next illustration we can actually see on the left there is sort of a corridor area that's been slightly changed, and then you've got a room, very important room on the right there, that's a number of structural changes, a number of bits of structural evidence we'll sort of come on to, steps, structural changes, a sort of blocked up window area directly behind that itself, behind the white little board there and that wall. There was a little bit of a corridor leading into it. So the access analysis of the site has actually completely changed. And it's sort of, the site's got really complex, and moving on to this as well, this is like a meter down before we've actually got to the earlier illustration. And later on in the medieval period, there's sort of reuse in the sort of later early medieval period, say about the 700-800s. They're not reusing the structure per se, and you can see how wonderfully well preserved it is. So a bit of an indication of a fort plan there, 80 AD, and a larger fort before that, a much smaller fort along Deer Street, and the hypocaust system there, the beautifully well preserved pili, and there's a bit of a reconstruction being done above that, and there the hole has been caused by a collapse that was caused by a cart as it was going across the site in 1815. So you're looking into one of the little flue mouths there, and this is one of 3 flue mouths that was later revealed. Arguments over this, whether it was the 1850s when these were revealed. I do believe it was. But whenever these were revealed, unlike other bits of archaeology across the country where they've been excavated by antiquarians, the archaeology at the site itself is extraordinarily well preserved for work that has been done in the 1800s. This wasn't left uncovered, it was backfilled, and we've got the credit there. We can actually see a bit of a reconstruction in the background, beautiful floor level, beautiful arches. Not many arches of this level of archaeology survived anywhere in Britain, so you can actually go down and have a little bit of a look at it. There's a pilgrimage. I know people who love their Roman archaeology like me, you want to touch the walls, you want to see it, you want to understand how these things work, how the pili has worked. Obviously areas of collapse, but the wall there is a very genuine wall built by Roman legionaries, Roman military, building this site, because the stonework that you can see here is exactly the same type of stonework that you can see at Vindolanda and the construction of Hadrian's Wall. Obviously Hadrian's Wall is being constructed a little bit later, but just within a generation or so. There you can see as they're going down, and then eventually this is an area of the site where you've got barrack blocks on a sort of bit of a higher level, and on a higher level the River Wear hasn't flooded it, and there's been more erosion, and the archaeology is less than a metre below the surface. But barrack blocks, you're not going to expect to see very tall standing buildings, because the timber at barrack blocks on a stone base was recovered and rebuilt, reconsolidated sort of every 7 years. So you're only going to find stone up on the upper levels. On the lower levels, you've got extraordinarily well preserved archaeology. So you can see the bath suite there. And there you can see the barrack blocks themselves in rows on the right. Obviously, timber's not going to survive, but further and further into further and further, you get better preserved archaeology, sort of more or less on the lower levels where it's been sort of inundated by the River Wear, sort of flooding, and sort of constantly encapsulating the site, as we see with Bath itself. the wonderful preservation of Bath, and similar preservation, the River Ouse and Foss itself in Eberark of York itself. So lots of the bathhouses in Britain are seemingly the best archaeology that we see in Britain, such as the Thamea at Leicester, the Thamea at Vericonium, Roxeter. And what you can see there, again, other evidence to say that you've got an undulating wall here, sort of indicative of the fact that the site has seen earlier build and subsidence. Again, look at that wonderful illustration there. We go into this room, and what we can see a wonderful sort of flag floor level, and those steps are particularly interesting to me because as I usually, when I'm usually talking to people about Roman Britain, you're looking at the contrast between Roman Britain, where you've got cold surfaces, and you've got warm surfaces earlier on, where you've got sort of ram clay and so on. That's warmer to the touch than cold surfaces of tiles and slabs. But with lots of tiles and slabs, lots of Roman buildings were actually centrally heated anyway. So eye candy there with the archaeology and recording, and what you can see is the reconstruction there. Looking around the room there, just before the reconstruction, alongside where that guy is sitting, you've got the hollow box tiles that run all the way up the walls. So what's happening is that the furnace is below, the hot air is being drawn underneath the floor naturally, and is being drawn up through the walls then, and then the walls are being heated, and then the hot air is then exiting out through the roof level itself. So we're looking there at the wonderful changes, lots of changes at the site, as you could probably appreciate with a Roman site. And that sort of elusive, when I say elusive corridor, that corridor that tells you so much, rich flags on the floor, sort of wall, door furniture as well, where you've got stone sort of framework, and then you'd have a stone lintel, obviously a wooden door that actually hasn't survived. And there you go, you've got sort of drainage showing there, sort of typical drainage, and the wonderful steps sort of in the background there. And I love those steps. Again, steps were sort of an innovation when we're building into the Roman period. Steps weren't really seen in the south in structures. It's a Roman invention, but what we do see, people watching this, don't correct me, obviously when you go to places like Orkney, they've had steps for thousands of years built out of stone, but it's in the rest of Britain that you don't see steps because you're not having those multiple structures. The only multiple structures that we got in large numbers are in the Neolithic Orkney landscape. So for the rest of Britain, you don't have any structures out of solid sort of steps or any solid floors until the Roman period. So what we've got here, Binchester Roman fort excavation unearthed Roman road. So what you've got here, a well-preserved Roman road and hundreds of fragments of Roman pottery. And this is constantly sort of bringing us more information as it's being shown over the years. And again, what you've got is, again, you've got carved sets of statuary, Mars, the Roman god of war, a statuette associated with that. Lots of altars, lots of mausolea, lots of sort of stone edifices along Deer Street as it's going through Binchester, and obviously a wonderful statue here associated with a couple of native gods. And it's sometimes useful to actually read these press releases online and sort of to actually read them in the media, because they're sort of doorsteps into understanding the site. Usually what we do see in press releases is the headline news, this is the most important find ever made in Britain. Looking at Roman archaeology, this is pretty much at the top of the best Roman archaeology ever discovered in Britain. A Roman road surface there with a bit of a drain alongside it. So a bit more information that everybody can sort of read in their leisure with Vinovia and sort of understanding Vinovia and the landscape. Vinovia, very similar name when you look at the likes of Vindolanda and the Roman site not so far away from this. In exploring the information below, I think one of the major things that archaeologists are trying to understand is the vicus, the civilian vicus that surrounds the site, an extensive civilian vicus, probably going over more hectares than I've actually described in the first place. Later history, what's really happening is because of constant flooding with the river, River Dee, the river isn't being kept back by the banks and dikes that the Romans would have constructed, associated with protecting the site from being flooded. So obviously, when Roman civilizations collapsing in this area in about the 450s, all the way up to the collapse of Rome in the west in 476, you've got a gradual expansion of the alluvium into the buildings and into the fort area, and eventually the high ground where the civilian vicus is, that's being slowly abandoned as well. But then you do have sort of the Anglo-Saxon period. There's a sense of occupation at the site. We should usually say the Angles are occupying the site. Or then the other tribes are actually sort of occupying Britain, influence in the area, because you don't have mass waves of people coming over to Britain, but it's more of an aristocratic takeover of the Roman Britain populations in the area, hence why we use the word Anglo-Saxons in the first place. So, I believe, for me, this site is an absolute gem, and it'd be a site that I want to visit with Archaeology Cymru when we do some more sort of trips throughout the landscape. And with the text, you can work out, moreover, that this wonderful story about its discovery. Read the text; it's really interesting. Where a cart's going across the site, and as I've already mentioned, the cart wheels collapses through a rut that is created, and you can imagine the farmers looking down and thinking, "Oh, what are all these sort of subterranean stacks there?" It must have been absolutely fascinating when the archaeologists, when the farmers initially finding the site. You've got explorations in the 1850s, and when they're exploring the 1850s and then into the 1870s and 1880s, some of the plans that they make at the site are extraordinary, leading time team to go to the site in 2007. When I go to the site in 2007, it's more about looking to see what we've got, and many time team episodes would show sort of early antiquarian excavation notes and so on, and there were one or two episodes of time team where they weren't finding anything based on these antiquarian notes. But when they were excavating at Binchester, time team started to hit the jackpot, really, understanding one of the extensive cemetery landscapes with Binchester, looking more about Deer Street. And one thing missing with this is the connection again with the Deer Street Roman road, and you've got evidence of a stone bridge crossing over the River Wear. Roman road bridges really don't happen to exist in many quantities in Britain. We know lots of them existed, but lots of them have actually been extensively eroded. Looking at the plan there, you can actually see on the left there, you can see sort of the modern farmhouse buildings, and all the houcher lines there, showing there the sort of subsidence and sort of river inundations of the landscape, the sort of alluvium sort of coming up further and further onto the site. But this fort must have been a wonderful site back in the day, and what archaeologists are actually seeing through the geophysics is a very complicated landscape. You can obviously make out the fort in the northeast corner there, but one thing that you can clearly see is a road going through and the extensive out of the area vicus around the site. There must have been, obviously we're talking about a garrison here of into the thousands. It was one of the biggest Roman forts in the north, and smaller garrisons of hundreds later on. But obviously the vicus must have been in the thousands of population. That's what you used to see at the site, an open field, but there's lots of excavations going on there. Again, it's closer to Bishop Auckland, within the Durham landscape, and the road showing there with the river, and you can see the bridge, and you can see the vicus to the northeast as well. And this is sort of an earlier plan from the 2000s, but there's so much that the archaeologists have actually added to this plan. and probably to understand the area of the site, archaeologists probably need to excavate for the next 100 years to give you a decent outline of what's going on, just like the Burley family is excavating at Vindolanda. Again, some of the earthworks, what they've got the site is actually roofed over now. The main sort of bath suite area reconsolidated. There's an artist plan from the 1800s of what the sort of step down to the sort of furnace areas used to look like. And the furnaces do look like this today. These wonderful plans from the 1800s, 1891, they made beautiful plans back then. Usually they would exaggerate and make things up, but in this case, they didn't. A wonderful, weird, circular hypocaust room found at the site as well. Again, we don't get circular hypocaust rooms, and I don't believe this room has actually been re-excavated. You can probably understand this, probably looking very much like this now today anyway. So again, you can get an idea of how the sort of box tiles through the wall actually worked. And again, you've got there sort of some columns. One thing they say about the columns and the fine stonework was that they were used as pit props in the 1800s, some of them being found. So lots of them are down pits now, supporting up sort of mine shaft workings. A well there. More wonderful, lots of inscribed carved stones have been found at the site, which wouldn't be unusual. Lots of Roman altar associated with sites connected roughly with Hadrian's Wall, and there's whole altar museums in the north. So what we do see, this is a little head discovered, and this little head discovered in 2013 made headline news. Does this look like anyone you know? It's very interesting, the carving there. It looks fairly crude, but then again, this could be portraying somebody with maybe facial abnormalities carved out of a local sandstone. Another sandstone carving. It's very strange. You see a dog-like creature in front of the hares that he might be chasing. So, don't know what's going on there. I go back to the geophysical image, and when you think again about what's going on with the site, so that pinky area there is where we then turn to this plan there, sort of some corner turrets, and notice you've got bread ovens there on the sort of left, and you've got sort of changes of barrack blocks that have replaced a road system. Bread ovens being built into the embankments away from the barracks, and then them being backfilled, and then barracks being built alongside the banks there. But the interesting thing is the second turret in there has an interesting depression there, and also you can see a sarcophagi. Now, this was probably converted into a latrine, a lavvy. And strangely enough, when the fort fell into disuse, as we see with lots of Roman forts in Britain, there's a stone sarcophagus there, and the stone sarcophagus there, again, indicating the period of abandonment at the site. Again, one thing that I'd like to state again is that the parallel here is the preservation of the archaeology of much earlier archaeology, 3,000 years earlier, when we see the Ness in Orkney. And obviously the use of stone is unparalleled, looking at Orkney, a huge space, and then going into the Roman period when you've got a huge use of stone there again. So you're looking there and you're going down the corridor, and there you go. You get weird slabs there that are perfect, and you can see the springers for an arch. That was originally part of a corridor that led to the building that we've already looked at adjacent to it, and that corridor has eventually been blocked in, and you're sort of thinking that, has this been converted into a little shrine? You've almost got these sort of uprights there showing in on the slabs of almost sort of like an altar sort of room, Mithraeum or something. Very interesting room itself, very well worth a visit. Lots of wonderful things being found there. This wonderful ring here with an intaglio. The intaglio itself is a very early sign of Christianity, a bronze ring with an intaglio on it, and it's showing two sort of fishes alongside or hanging from an anchor, which is an early sign of Christianity. I think this is absolutely fascinating, the minutiae of the archaeology being found at Vinovia. And again, the stone here with some, again, carvings on it, altar carvings. Again, lots more to read. So stop and read the text and the context of this stuff. And obviously, look out for the news in 2019, 2020 for more discoveries at Vinovia. Looking forward to next week's lecture. Thank you very much for listening. Archaeology Cymru, Karl-James Langford, over and out.